a large amount of business travel and a large amount of commuting was normative, performative, and driven by things like presenteeism. It wasn't. I mean, I used to get annoyed by people. I said, look, why does everybody travel in at 8 o'clock in the morning on a train on which you can't work because it's too crowded? Okay. And then they get into the office at 9 o'clock and then they spend 2 hours doing email and looking at screens. Screens, which, by the way, would be exactly the same were they at home. Okay. And so even before we talked about, the 2-day week or the 3-day week in the office and the 4-day week at home, I always thought there was a sort of stupidity to this because I always used to work from home in the morning, travel in on an empty train, work on the train. And so the amount of time my commute took out of my working day was minimal. Whereas if I travel in earlier, the amount of productive time that my commute took out of my working day was about an hour and a bit, actually more, because 2 directions sometimes, okay? And so there's something a bit weird here, which is that I think an awful lot of this was just driven by social norms, the assumption that you could only transact with people if you'd met them in person. Now, there's a cost to Zoom, okay? This is a really interesting asymmetry, okay? Zoom is not quite as good as meeting face-to-face most of the time. Although for introverts, for certain people, for certain meetings, I think actually Zoom improves it. I've got a financial advisor. I want a Zoom-based financial advisor, right? I don't want a guy who wants to come round to the house when I've got to sign papers, because that's a pain in the arse. And it means I've got to get home by 7 o'clock and my wife's got to be home at the same time. We've got to get a diary appointment. But I want my financial advisor to bully me a bit to save money, because otherwise I'll just piss it up the wall on consumer electronics, right? So I need this guy to bully me, and Zoom is just the right amount of bullying, okay? I don't want a guy sitting in my kitchen getting me to fill in forms, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I like a guy who's a bit like it's Peloton for money. Basically, this is what I've got out of my financial advisor. It's someone bullying me on a screen. And I think there are lots of roles that can be performed, some medical roles, some educational roles that can be performed much, much better virtually. But nonetheless, in certain settings, there's a cost to not being there in person. But the cost is very, very visible and very salient. The opportunity cost of demanding that a meeting be arranged and that you can only meet with and talk with for an hour those people who happen to be within reach of London, and the opportunity cost of saying the only people we can employ among younger staff are people who can somehow afford to move to the most expensive city outside kind of Tokyo and a couple of other places, okay? This is the fact that I can't really make my staff rich, okay? Because by demanding that they live in London, I can give them, fancy, what young people want, fixie bicycles, and, I can give them all that hipster shit, right? But I can't actually give them a nice place to live, which they own and in which they bring up a family, okay? That's a huge opportunity cost, and we're not factoring this in because we just took the cost of London as being a given. But if I pay a member of my young staff who lives in London, okay, if I pay them a pay rise, 50% of it goes in, 40%, 50% goes in tax. Actually, more than 50% goes in tax, probably, of the increment. And ultimately, travel and accommodation costs will take up 50% of what's left over. So it's an incredibly inefficient way to reward people. Every time we have a round of pay rises at Ogilvy, we should actually write letters of congratulations to buy-to-let landlords, not really to our staff. Congratulations, you can now rip off this guy a little bit more, okay? Because in the long term, that's what happens. And so, I've got one colleague who now basically is going to work from Sheffield. As I said, if we pay him generously, he'll be in the Yorkshire equivalent of the Playboy Mansion in 10 years, right? Put kettle on, love, I'm in grotto. But it's a really interesting point, which is that there are asymmetries of perception. We notice, so costs, unnecessary costs are really, really quantifiable. Lost opportunities aren't. And so most of business gets focused on reducing visible costs rather than maximising potential opportunities.